It's Louisiana versus all y'all's Recruit That Boot. I'm Jarrett Roser. He's Sam Spiegelman, and we're kind of winding down all of the late summer rush of commitments before heading into this season. And so we'll talk about these last two really big commitments probably for the state of Louisiana heading into the season. A couple of other notable guys out there entering their senior seasons, still looking for college homes, and just kind of the outlook for what that means at this point in 2024, 2025 cycle college recruiting, as well as kind of wrapping it up with, a moment to reflect on the late great Ed Daniels and losing him heading into a football season. It's obviously not going to be the same without him. But Sam, as always, good to see you, man. Appreciate you taking some time. How we doing as this calendar quickly approaches September now?
Yeah, I was on meetings earlier and I had mentioned, kind of organically, I am 3 weeks into my season, so I am a total train wreck, getting sleep where I can. But so far my head is above water, getting ready to go out to the SIP this weekend, which should be fun. And yeah, we had talked privately. I know we've privately been talking about this, but I thought the podcast. I know last week we probably we had a lot of news and we didn't really get a chance to give our thoughts on Ed Daniels. But as football season begins in Louisiana, to me, I know that we'll talk about it more, but I can't. It's just incredible to even think about not having Ed around on Friday nights, whether it was seeing him at games or we've been together on plenty of Friday nights and post games. I run home to catch Ed and Coach Curtis on WGNO. Those guys are legends, and I love all of the little things that the community is doing to honor Ed, because in our field, a lot of times we get overlooked, and Ed is not the kind of person that ever should or will be overlooked, and it's great to see him be remembered in such a positive light, because he offered such a positive light as long as he's been around on Friday nights. So.
Yeah, I mean, we're already here, so we might as well just flip things and start with, continuing to talk about Ed a little bit. And I think folks should know too, as they start watching this, that there is some fundraising effort going on right now to help Miss Robin and the Daniels family. It's obviously, a prolonged health issue for Ed at the end there after suffering the heart issues out at Saints camp. And so a lot of medical bills and expenses and things going on right now. And so I'll find a link to, if you're interested and have the means to potentially help with that effort, I'll make sure to incorporate that link into the description section below this video. But I mean, everything you said, you alluded to the fact that we have been together at your house back in your old house in New Orleans, watching Ed and Coach Curtis there wrapping up some of the Friday night stuff. And that's something that, growing up in the New Orleans area, has been around since I was a pretty small child. I mean, really just becoming aware of football at any level as a youngster in the early 90s. And whether it be at high school games or, I wasn't around at any of the Saint stuff, but at LSU game coverage or Tulane or whatever, aura is such a trendy word these days in the world around us. And there was for sure an aura around Ed and just kind of the way he carried himself, and the relationships that he clearly had, the respect dynamics with coaches and growing legends in their own right of the game. And so it's already very weird going to some of this LSU stuff to start the season and him not be there. He's somebody that I think has been pretty inspirational to both of us, and just kind of the way he carried himself and the passion that he had for covering high school athletics, a guy that covered sports at the highest of levels, but still had such a passion to spotlight these young athletes coming through, New Orleans and Louisiana. And so it's been pretty tough for an awful lot of people around the state and around the country to say goodbye.
Yeah, no doubt. I know that he would have loved to have been coming up at Gormley for a couple of these big games that are coming up this season. I consider him just to be a fabric of our little media community out there, and like kind of what you alluded to, he just all the different relationships and connections and little small anecdotes that he included on his highlights or even in conversation. He was, it might sound stupid, but he was like the perfect local newsman that just knew everything about around town. And New Orleans is the most unique of towns, and Ed was beloved by everyone, whether you're in the river parishes or in the city or out in the Catholic League. It was whatever was your beat. Ed offered something, and I always just loved running into him on a game or jamboree season. I always ran into him. And just his the fact that he welcomed me into that fraternity, it just meant the world to me. It felt like such a huge accomplishment for me personally as the person I am. And I know you feel the same way. So I'm glad we got a chance to at least reflect on Ed because he's great and we're going to be thinking about him all season long.
Yeah, no doubt. And there's no smooth transition from that to talking about some of the latest news and a couple of these guys announcing college commitments that we mentioned. But I mean, it's kind of what Ed would want is to shift some of that spotlight to these kids and some of their accomplishments and achievements and potential and whatnot. And so starting the weekend Friday, a guy that we've talked an awful lot about, Nate Sheppard, officially announces his commitment to Duke, the fantastic, well-rounded Mandeville running back, and really for Mandeville, a three-phase standout. Saw him make a huge, chase down tackle on defense on Friday night against Jesuit. He followed up that commitment announcement with a really fun Friday night scrimmage Friday night scrimmage that made it look like he's about ready to pick up right where he left off from last year's prolific season. And he had a lot to say about the relationship with Coach Willie Simmons, the running back coach up there with the Blue Devils, as being a determining factor for this. As I mentioned, we've talked a lot about Nate, but just your thoughts on his official announcement and how huge of a get it is for the Blue Devils to land him.
Yeah, we've talked about Louisiana being having a heavy hand of running backs that are going to play at the next level, and Nate is certainly one of those gifted 3-down backs. I always joke with him; he is the all-purpose back of this class. What he did for Mandeville last season, paving the way for a very deep playoff run, as you saw, and we're going to get to. I want to hear more about your thoughts about seeing him in his preseason tune-up in just a minute, but. Looks like he picked up right where he left off. We know that he's only continued to add to his frame and kind of, he's always diversified his skill set with how good of a pass catcher he is. And talking to him leading into the decision, I was very surprised to hear that Northwestern had kind of fallen back after his official visits, and this has been a Duke versus Cal race. We've talked about Tulane kicking the tires as well, but this was closer than people realize. I told you after talking to some sources that I felt pretty good about Duke, but the morning of, there was still some chatter about Cal. So I know that this went down to the wires, and like you said, Coach Simmons over there at Duke, a big reason why. That's a former head coach that went to Duke to be the running backs coach, and a lot of coaches see what we see in Nate, the fact that he can contribute in so many different facets. But I think Coach Simmons and his experience, his NFL experience, the guys that he's coached that have gone on to play on Sundays, I think that was a big factor for Nate. And just like his brother, he followed the student athlete motto first. And now his older brother, Will, is playing for Deion Sanders at Colorado. I'm not saying that Duke isn't going to turn a corner because the day after Nate committed, they got a big flip from a top 100 defensive end out there in Carolina. So maybe Duke is getting to be on a new level. But if not, he is the talented sort of kid, and he's smart enough to know what the world of college football is. We could see him maybe, shine pretty early in Durham, and I wouldn't be surprised if he was playing at a bigger stage a few years after that.
It was funny, just kind of piggybacking on a couple of the dynamics you just mentioned with, how close some of this was. I joked with Nate after when we were interviewing, as he, after a couple of coaches talked about him and it was his turn to talk and actually make the announcement, he looked at the Tulane hat for a second, and there was one of his classmates, a young lady behind me, who I heard tell other friends, "I told y'all, I knew it was going to be Tulane." and then he grabbed the Duke hat, and I asked him. He said he kept it pretty tightly wrapped about how many people knew where he was heading into the final day or final days, and even members of his family and support system that were on hand as he said that. I peripherally saw them kind of nod and be like, yeah, I didn't know until today. And so that was kind of funny how some of that played out. And then we talked so much. Nate's obviously an extremely intelligent young man, and you see the nature of some of the not only athletic programs in the mix in his top five, but the academic status of some of those institutions as well. And I asked him about that, and the coaches leading into his announcement talked a little bit about that. When I asked Nate, he kind of downplayed it and said, yeah, I mean, it kind of worked out that way, but I was really looking for the best football fits and football opportunities. And if I felt like my best opportunity had been an SEC school, I for sure, would have gone there over some of these other places. But I just feel that great about Duke and the fit there with Coach Simmons and company. And so that was all kind of interesting. And then yeah, he goes out there and does on Friday night, despite not necessarily being 100% healthy, kind of working through some preseason nicks and bruises for a kind of beat up Skippers team right now heading into the season. He didn't play through some of that controlled scrimmage, numbered downs portion of the scrimmage early on, and just played the live quarters, and immediately was gaining extra yards through contact, ended up with 2 breakaway long touchdowns, and somehow still his highlight of the night is probably a would have been touchdown that got called back on a penalty elsewhere, where he got outside, turned the corner, and accelerated in a hurry, and then just, I mean, football posterized a Jesuit defender where he lowered his shoulder and blew the kid up on his way to the end zone. And so you got a chance to see kind of the full complement of what he brings to the table as a running back. And also what we didn't get to see is he's a pretty skilled route runner and receiver for a high school running back at this point as well. And so that goes to what you're talking about as a true third down back, where he's a dangerous guy that they'll be able to move around the formation if they'd like to, because he's really comfortable doing that as well.
Yeah, as we prepared for his Friday announcement, I had gone through some of the film over the last couple of years I had of Nate, and a lot of it is 7-on-7 because I haven't been to Mandeville for a game in some time. Well, hopefully that'll change this season, but he's a fantastic route runner. He warms up with receivers. He runs routes. I don't think I've actually ever seen him drop a pass that wasn't out of his range. He's a fantastic route runner. His timing is really well on his routes. But let me ask you this: Are you after this Friday tune-up? Are you just high on the Skippers and Nate, or are you down on those Roser Blue Jays? Are they the Mid-City Mayhem going to come for the Blue Jays this year, or what?
I saw the gleam in your eye and knew it was going to be a question of where my confidence is in the Blue Jays heading into this season. I talking to some folks about some of the new additions to that staff, and also knowing a couple of the players on that roster that I like an awful lot. I mean, Will Berry and Zyron Forstall on that defensive line are 2 guys I like an awful lot in the 26 and 27 class. Derek LaBeouf, a senior defensive back who I think is a really talented young football player, and that list kind of goes on. There's a lot I like, and obviously Coach Manali I think is regarded not just by us, but a lot of his peers as high school coach around the state as a really high level, one of the really good Louisiana high school football coaches. And so there's a lot to like about where they are. They are breaking in some young guys into big roles, including trying to find a quarterback successor to the graduated senior Bo Perez from last year. And so they had 4 different quarterbacks take snaps and are really still trying to find some things in some places. But Coach Manali, talking to him afterward, he left encouraged. He said last year he left that scrimmage and was a little bit less encouraged, less confident coming out of that than he was coming out of this week. And so that's good to hear, because obviously anyone in the Catholic League, it is always a gauntlet, regardless of what those first couple weeks of the season hold. It's tough to win games once you get into October in that league. And so, there's going to be challenges ahead of them left and right. And we'll see how they kind of come together through these next few weeks to be ready to handle all that. All that said, the Skippers, I I'm interested to see how they come together as well. Coach Jones talked about that some afterward, that this is not the same team in terms of some of the veteran depth as the one that made that run last year. They've obviously got some great veteran leaders back in guys like a Nate or a Michael White, another three-phase playmaker for those guys, but that they're going to be looking at a lot of young guys to come along early in this season and be ready by the time they get into their district and then the playoffs to potentially make a run. And so watching those two teams' journeys from late August to late October and into November will be really interesting.
That's Craig Jones, who brought Lakeshore all the way to the Superdome not too long ago. And that is Coach Manali, who, of course, had Jesuit in the state championship in his first season in Mid-City. But, man, all eyes are going to be on the Catholic League this year. We got Carr, we have Easton, we have a new face over at St. Aug. I don't know if you've heard about this. Rummel is on its way back. Holy Cross took a huge step back up to relevance. I love the Catholic League. I feel like that's like in a couple of decades, I want to be just a Catholic League historian.
Yeah, it's awesome football. The parity in that league and a high level competitive parity in that league has always been great. I mean, going back years and years, even before you then bump John Curtis up into the mix, where you obviously, put one of the storied traditional powers, not only on a New Orleans landscape, not only on a statewide landscape, but literally on a national landscape. Put those guys in the mix a couple of years ago. Added Nakar, who's been as good as anyone in the state for years now, and now Warren Easton, who has been a consistent contender and made trips to the Dome and all those things. And it went from as good of a district in the state as any to adding 3 more of the premier programs over the span of whatever it's been now, 10 years. It's crazy.
We'll have to get Coach Hank on the podcast soon too, because I'm pretty sure Shaw's going to be coming back in a few years if things keep trending the right way for them too.
And look, St. Charles Catholic wants to move up to 5A and be able to compete in that Catholic League.
Could look at the list of coaches that are already in the Catholic League and then add Wayne Stein and Hank Tierney? Like, give me a break. This is like the AFC West with Andy Reid in there and Jim Harbaugh. Like, give me a break.
I was going to say, if it gets to that point where those teams, the amount of teams that would be in play at that point, can they even keep it together numbers wise, or do they have to split it into two different
Can the injuries
groups?
can they stave off the injury bug all season with them getting those beatdowns week to week?
But imagine that league or those two leagues or whatever it ends up having to be at that point, if it does reach that point, that ends up being talking about almost the way we look at college football, where it's like, okay, there's the SEC and the Big Ten, and then everybody else is kind of not really playing on the same level. That's where that would start to feel from a select schools around the state standpoint. That's how it would start to feel. Obviously, you still have Catholic Baton Rouge out there and a couple of others that would be able to play some spoilers, but from a district to district standpoint, it would be a little bit insane.
Yeah, I think Coach Hudson might have something to say about that. Coach Ball up in Ruston might have something to say about that. That's just a couple of names that would just trickle off my list. I'm sure I'm leaving out a couple of goats out there that want to chime in too.
Excellent transition point, because we've got a young Ruston standout to talk about. They're obviously over on that non-select side of Division I and on the far side of the state and whatnot. But Aidan Anding, another guy we've talked about an awful lot on some of these episodes, who has just, I don't know if it's overshooting it to call his rise as a football prospect the last year fairly meteoric of a rise, to go from a kid that was not playing football a year and a half ago or whatever it may be, 15 months ago, to being, I think, a top 10 to 12 prospect in Louisiana's 2025 class and an LSU commit. His continued emergence and knowing that we might just be seeing sort of scratching the surface tip of the iceberg of what his potential is, because we're still so early in his football experience, essentially. I thought, all of that said, huge get for, Coach Raymond, Coach Olson, Coach Baker and company with that LSU defense to continue what has been an exceptional 6-week run of adding guys to that 2025 secondary class.
Yeah, I'm wondering when they're going to slow down. But I think that they're finally filling up space. But No, I think you're right, and not only has it been a meteoric rise, Coach Ball to go out of his way to point out that Aidan's return to Ruston, leading to their state championship, the role that he played, obviously defending Trades Green, who is an all alien world tight end, now making plays as a freshman at LSU, and obviously the punt return to paint um, against. I was showing this to my wife the other day to see what her reaction would be, and I'm like, this is against a Zachary coach team. This is not just doing this on a week 3 non-district game. This is stepping up in the biggest of settings. This is someone, like you said, that wasn't playing football the entire year before, came back to the sport, made an immediate impact, and now I think, once he saw his potential, once he saw that, hey, football is a path for me. We saw that the offers started to flutter in, and I think the work ethic. He's been training, day in and day out, going in practice against guys like Ahmad Houston Hudson, that is going to be another one of these all-world tight ends in the 2027 class, and taking on a leadership role and teaching his brother the ropes a little bit. I think with the right coaching, the coaching he's getting at Ruston, he's playing at a very high clip. When he goes and gets coached by Blake Baker and Jake Olson and Corey Raymond and learns the ins and outs, he talked about that as being kind of the catalyst. I mean, he was close to committing to Texas multiple times. Texas continued to make a run until his late August decision date. But Corey Raymond was the catalyst here. Corey Raymond has the resume, the track record, and a big theme of this class. And we've probably had this conversation multiple times over multiple years. But in this particular class, much like last year, it may not have all the national star power, minus guys like Bryce Underwood and so forth. But there's right now there's not many names that you are saying LSU is going to worry about letting this guy leave the state. And I think Aidan Anding was one that Corey Raymond would have loved to have worked out in camp, but did not want to see playing in the SEC on the opposite side on Saturdays in a few years at Texas. It was someone that he saw all the traits that you and I have seen over the past couple of months, and has all the makings to be a dynamic cornerback, possibly a nickel. I love his multi-sport background. I love his competitiveness, his ball skills. And I love when DBs are also on the kick and punt return aspect. I think it just adds more value to their game. And when they get to, the ability to move into the open field and turn and run comes naturally to returners. And I think that it comes naturally to Aidan, which is what makes him so special as we think about him projecting at corner.
Yeah, for a guy that was new-ish, new to varsity football, new-ish to the sport by comparison to a lot of guys that he's lining up against throughout last season, his ability to step up in these high-profile matchups, to snatch interceptions from Juwan Johnson, to battle the guy you talked about, all universe, all extraterrestrial team, whatever, Trades Green, who
I love that, and
Aiden's
I'm stealing that. The all extraterrestrial team. I love it.
Aidan is in the dome in his first year playing varsity football against one of the top prospects in the nation, and he's giving up 8 inches of height to Trades Green, and he's so springy, and his timing is so good on some of these plays that even catches in a lot of cases that Trey was making, Aidan's hand is all the way on the football, and you can't have played the situation better. It's just a matter of Trades Green is 6'7", 6'8", and has really strong hands and can jump as well. And so even some of the plays that Trey won, it was just such a battle. That was one of the highlights of the entire Dome weekend, was watching those two guys go at it. I was actually a little bit salty ending that weekend, seeing people, because of the nature of social media, jumping on Aidan's case about some of the Trades highlights and not realizing, I mean, guys are going to win reps, and they traded reps at points in that game in a way that was really impressive for Trey, certainly, who ends up having a great game, but also for Aidan and the way that he played a guy of that caliber. Also, throughout the season, for a guy that's coming over from the basketball court and the track and all these things, he was not shy about playing physically. Like, he'd come down and get involved in run support. I saw him with a big play against Jesuit in the game where Ruston came down in New Orleans, where I'm trying to remember what it was, whether he forced a fumble or came up with a fumble in a scrum or whatever it was. But Aidan's not shy about getting involved in the physicality in the scrum. And so that, as a guy that is playing varsity football this is a few weeks into his first season doing it, I thought was really impressive for for a defensive back. And I'm super excited about what the future holds for him as he continues to develop with all of that coaching that you mentioned. And I'm also very interested to see, as uneasy as I was at times throughout last week of, I'm not hearing back from Aidan. Is it going to end up being Texas? What's going on here with some of the communication dynamics going on? I kept coming back as one facet of it to, is Ahmad Bro really going to let Aidan Anding leave Louisiana and not come down to Baton Rouge? And so Aidan commits to LSU, continues what has been for decades a strong run of, if LSU wants a Ruston guy, they're largely going to get that Ruston guy. And now they continue to strengthen that pipeline, knowing that Ahmad Hudson is on the horizon, knowing that Aidan's little brother Jaden as a talented young prospect that we'll see where his recruitment blows up to. That pipeline may exponentially increase here in the coming years, and to keep that going with a guy who I think has a chance to be one of the best in Louisiana's 2025 class is all really exciting for the Tigers.
Yeah, I think you said top 12 earlier. In my mind, I know for sure Aiden's in my top 15 or so in the state, obviously going into his senior season, which is going to be so telling for him. But when you were talking about his battle with Trades and when we saw him against Jesuit in Gormley, pesky. DBs are meant to lose. The game is designed for offensive playmakers. I mean, you're going against someone like Trades or whoever you're going against. If you're going against someone of that nature, they're going to have the tools to win. Pesky is all you can ask for, and making guys like Trades or whoever battle. And he does that so well, so consistently. It was just a great point by you, and I just wanted to piggyback on that, Jarrett.
Well, thanks so much. I appreciate that recognition for both me and for Aidan's game. All right. So I think we're now at a point where something like 75 of Louisiana's top senior players are committed to colleges around the country. We will probably see some more end up with late opportunities. There's still some great guys around the state who are uncommitted heading into senior year. And so looking at, I guess, what the landscape looks like for these guys in the big picture of 2025 recruiting, wanted to talk about some of those guys a little bit, but also we're getting to a point where a lot of the hay is in the barn for the 2025 class. So as guys going in right now who are not committed, for fans that are trying to understand some of the dynamics, what is the outlook in, on average for a lot of these guys heading into the season still looking for college homes?
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, the majority of kids, whether they're nationally ranked, 250 kids or general, the top kids in the state, the Power 4 bound kids, the majority already have their decisions made. We talked about Aidan and Nate being kind of the last couple of kids left in Louisiana. And from my regional standpoint, I mean, those were some of the last dominoes to fall around the entire Southeast. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that there's not flips. A lot of 2025 kids, the majority had to make their decisions in the spring and summer. That's why they're already committed going into their senior seasons. But that doesn't mean that the other, 3 or 4 schools that were in that top group ever slowed down. In some cases, never stopped. So right now, I think that, for 2025, it's going to be largely, are they going to change their mind? Are they going to visit a couple of schools and then maybe that'll reaffirm their commitment to wherever they're committed? And then there's the group of kids that are still uncommitted, and senior season evals are critical, whether you're committed or not. Colleges it's a business, and they want to make sure that they're getting the player that they think that they're getting. And, senior season eval will also say, be a pretty good indicator level you can play at the next level. So you're looking at some of the top guys still left in this 2025 class, guys like Trey Fuller from Captain Shreve or Deshaun Ford from Opelousas. These are very talented players that you and I have both seen. Guys that we think will be playing on Saturdays somewhere and maybe had some Power 4 offers or Group of 5 offers. But after camp season, still are uncommitted. I don't want to say it's a red flag at this point, but the majority of kids are committed. So these are guys that are going to have to play well over the first month or so of the season. And I think that'll be a pretty good indicator of what teams either circle back or start, pressing for those guys. But, everyone's process is different. Doesn't mean that it's wrong. it's just, for certain guys, like if you're looking at LSU's class, guys like Aidan or Philip Wright, they didn't even wait to see how their senior season started. So I think in the introduction of the NIL era and this process of getting things straightened up before September, before the actual season starts, because they have to start competing for college football playoff spots, they want their class largely intact and done. So guys, if they're pretty iffy on them, they have an offer or they have them, they are committed. But it does bode pretty looms pretty large for guys like Fuller and Ford that are still looking for homes. They kind of need to prove what level they're going to be able to play at, and then from there, they got to do their homework to make some visits and make a tough decision pretty quickly.
I think we're still looking at a couple of guys that, depending on how this next month or so goes, have an opportunity to sneak into some late scholarship spots at with the Cajuns or the Bulldogs or someplace like that, and probably a lot of guys who have a chance to be what I think can be steals for the Southland teams and whatnot around the state. I do still think that there are going to be 25 plus guys in this class that find some level of D1 home somewhere over the coming months. And it may be a different place than what they looked like or expected it might be, a few months ago, but there's going to be some opportunities there as a starting point. And that's kind of the name of the game at this point. In a lot of ways in college recruiting is get your foot in the door somewhere and then prove it on the field, both the playing field and the practice field and the weight room and all those things at that first stop and see where you can build to from there. And you mentioned too, I want to get your take on the flip dynamics of who are guys that you're watching that are going to be kind of pressed by some other programs to possibly make decisions difficult for them to stick with their current commitments. And I say half jokingly, how many of them are Houston commitments right now? Because I think we're probably watching Ken LSU pry maybe a couple of those guys away. But also I had a chance to talk to Jasper Parker from Shaw on Thursday night about, where he's at since the aforementioned Philip Wright flipped his commitment from Michigan to LSU. And he said in our interview, yeah, I'm hearing from a school in the home state as well as some other schools that are pushing, and I'm committed to the Wolverines. I like where I'm at and everything, but some of these schools are going to make it tough on those guys to stick with it over the course of the next few months. Who are you watching closely?
Man, you took the words right out of my mouth. I was on the phone with someone very close to the West Bank this past week, and they had mentioned Jasper Parker, very good player, which we can definitely attest to. He is in the Rivals 250. We got him ranked as high as anyone in the country. With that frame and that again, a 3-down skill set, that dude can catch the football and he can run between the tackles too. He's special. I think Michigan might have Coach Tony Alford might have a hard time holding on to him, and same with his teammate. I've talked about Mr. Washington being one of those dynamic pass catchers that I think will compete with Teron Francis to be the wide receiver one in the state. Whether it's LSU, whether it's Missouri, whether it's another school. Just because we're talking about LSU right now, doesn't mean that other schools are going to stop recruiting the best players from Louisiana, and especially if they see a hole that LSU is not recruiting them, which I don't see why they wouldn't recruit Jasper Parker or Jacob Washington. But other names, of course, to watch, Jacob Bradford, obviously, picked up his LSU offer. And after just a few weeks after his Houston commitment, DK Mays, another Houston commit that camped and earned an offer from Bo Davis and Frank Wilson. Those are a few of the names. And then just to circle back even further, Jarrett, we talked about, this could be a stepping stone. So, these guys that maybe had Power 4 offers that maybe end up Group of 5 or Southland or whatever, that's the name of the game. And now in the transfer market, all you need to have is one good season and you get back to, realizing your potential at the right level. And, conversely, if you're committed to one of these smaller level schools, a great senior season might open the door for you to get recruited by an LSU or a Mississippi State or an Ole Miss or, Texas or TCU. A lot of these schools recruit Louisiana very well, and they pay a lot of attention to senior season evals. So it works in both facets. So between flips and senior season evals, Jared, we are on the road kicking.
No doubt. And I've already kept you a little bit longer than a lot of our episodes have been recently, but we covered an awful lot of ground. In a wide range of topics and some emotions and whatnot too at the front end of this. But we will talk more next week and look at what this season holds from a high school football standpoint, including some of those week 1 matchups that have some great notable prospect versus prospect type dynamics on the field that we'll get a chance to watch in week 1 around the state. And so looking forward to that conversation. Folks should look forward to, to seeing some of the perspective that we can share on what some of those matchups might look like. And Sam, appreciate you as always.
You might even see me next Wednesday because I might be in your neck of the woods.
We're just gonna pull up chairs next to each other
in the middle of the podcast.
Yeah. Keep an eye out to see how we reveal where Sam is when we record next week's Recruit That Boot. He will be
coming home
boot as we prepare for a couple of matchups and some more travels around some Louisiana's top programs and athletes next week. It's football season now, but it is really officially Louisiana high school football season next week. And so keep an eye out for it. You look like you had something more to add.
I was going to say it's jam week and it's that time, baby.
He's Sam Spiegelman. I'm Jarrett Roser. This is Louisiana's Recruit That Boot. Until next time. Thanks, y'all.